attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Intro to M1 Programming with the ElkRP2 Software. My name is Brad Weeks, and I'm in Elk Technical Support. Joining me today will be Amy Strickland. And today we're going to talk about the M1, the second part here, Programming with the ElkRP2 Software. Alright, so at any time during today's webinar, if you have any questions, please type those questions into your GoToWebinar control panel there on the right-hand side of your screen. We will try to get to as many of those questions as we can today during the webinar. However, if there are any unanswered questions or anything that we couldn't address during today's webinar, there will be a follow-up email next week. So the ElkRP programming software is by Elk Products, and it is offered free of charge from our website. You can go to our website at elkproducts.com. It does require a username and password, so if you haven't requested your username and password yet, please go ahead and do that. Those do get approved as soon as possible during normal business hours, Monday through Friday. And then once you have your software downloaded, just like any other Windows program, you get an icon on your desktop, double click it to run it. Oh, sorry, no, we're not quite done yet. Alright, so at this point, I am going to turn the webinar over to Amy, and she's going to take you through some of the important aspects of setting up the software and some features built into the software, and then I will join again later to go over some automation features. So Amy, at this time I'm going to turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you, Brad, and thank you everyone for attending today. I'm going to go ahead and pull up the ElkRP software on my computer here. You should be seeing that on your screen now. And what you're seeing here is, once you install the ElkRP software from the download that Brad was just talking about, when you launch the program, it's going to come up to a screen that looks very much like this one, with just some basic default accounts and templates and that sort of thing. So there will be a few accounts already there. You don't really want to use these accounts for actually programming in M1. These are again just some examples and templates for you to use. So when you are wanting to work with a new M1 system, you do want to create a new account in the software for that system, and you can do that by either clicking the New button here or going to the File menu and clicking New Account. That's going to bring up your New Account window. This window is looking for some information about this M1. The account ID is basically a file name. That is however you want to identify this particular account within the software. As you work with multiple M1s and you get a lot of different accounts, you want to have some way to know which account goes with which M1, other than trying to look at serial numbers and stuff like that. So maybe you give that a name based on the customer or the location of the installation. Maybe you have your own account number system that you use. So that's entirely up to you how you want to name that. This doesn't actually get stored in the M1, and it's not at all associated with the central station account number, although if you wanted to use your central station account number you could, but the account number for your central station gets stored in a different location, and we'll show you that as we go through the software here. So I'm just going to call this training ID here for my account ID. The serial number, that is actually going to be located on the M1 control, and if we're talking about an M1 Gold, the M1 Gold has a black outer housing, a plastic housing that the circuit board is in, and the serial number is going to be located on a barcode label at the bottom of that housing. And if you were with us last week when we were going over the hardware part, we pointed out where that serial number is, but you do need to enter that. It is an 8-character serial number, and you do have to enter all 8 characters. Now most serial numbers are going to start with a few zeros, and then there'll be some other letters and numbers that are part of the serial number. The next piece of information here is the RP access code. And the code that you're seeing on the screen now, 246801, is the default code. So if this is a brand new M1 that's never been connected to before, you can just leave it at that 246801 for now. If you happen to be creating a new account to connect to an existing panel and you know that that RP access code has been changed to something else, you can go ahead and enter that here now. You do need to be very cautious with the RP access code as it is required that it match what is stored in the M1 to allow the connection. The software and the M1 compare two pieces of information during connection. One is the serial number itself, and the other is this RP access code. And if either one of those do not match, it will not allow the connection. So again, it's very important to make sure that you have the appropriate RP access code for the system and the correct serial number with all the characters. So below this note here about the RP access code, there are a couple of options. If you have a template that you want to go by, maybe you set up a template account and you always have your zone sort of structured in the same way, or you want to fill in some of the central station information, or some of the other programming parameters are pretty much going to be the same for every system, then you can create template accounts and you can copy from those accounts. But in most cases, you will just create a default account, and even within that there are two different options. So let me explain the difference between those. The create a version 5.x account, that would apply to any M1s that are new coming from our factory now, or for several years in the past we've been on the 5.x as far as what we've been shipping out of our doors. The difference between the 5.x and the 4.x is directly related to wireless. So in most cases you're going to pick 5.x. If you have wireless and it's either the Elk wireless, or you have a wireless receiver that is manufactured by Elk to support either the GE or the Honeywell format sensors, then you're going to choose the 5.x. It would only be in a situation where you are working with a much older M1 panel that happens to have a CADEX receiver connected to the J3 connector on the M1 board, which is just behind the serial port. So only in that case where you have that older firmware to support the older receiver option would you select the 4.x. So once I click OK, it's actually going to go through the process of retrieving all of the data to create this default account, and we're going to be brought to this account details screen. Now there's some information here that's basically just for record keeping purposes. This information doesn't actually get stored in the M1, and I'm referring to your name, address fields, your contact information, notes, that sort of thing. So this is just for your record keeping purposes so that you have that information readily available. The notes section here is a great place to put in reminders of things that you might need to know related to the account, like maybe you have an explanation of a certain rule that you have in the system that you want to make sure it never gets removed. Maybe the customer has some rules of the home or business that you need to abide by. Maybe in a home you're not supposed to go through the living room with your shoes on. You need to slip your shoes off, or maybe you want to be reminded that they have a pet of some kind, that sort of thing. So just whatever kind of notes that you might want to keep there is a great place for note keeping. Also, if you have a system that say has an M1XEP Ethernet interface, and you're sometimes connecting to that system locally, sometimes you're connecting to it remotely, this is a good place to keep notes about what URL or IP settings you would use for one or the other. On the right side of this screen, we have some information that is populated automatically when you connect to a system that is related to that system itself. Hardware, bootware, firmware versions, and there's also some information here about when the last time you connected, when the last time the account was changed and saved. You can also make a note here of the installation date. That's always going to default to the current date when you create a new account. And here we have the serial number, which we did enter earlier. Now this field can be changed if need be, and that the scenario where you may need to do that is if you're switching out the M1 panel and you want to load these same settings in a new panel. If you do run into a situation where you may have to actually switch out the main board, you can change the serial number so that you will be able to connect. Once you are connected, if you did want to change the RP access code for security purposes, there's a change button here. And again, we have a lengthy description here, a warning of making sure that if you do change this code, that you realize that you need to make a record of it, and that if you don't have that code, you're locked out of that panel, and the only way to unlock it is to send it into the factory, and there is a charge for having the panel unlocked. If you do want to change that, you can continue yes here, and it will give you a field where you can put in a new code. Hold on just a moment, not sure what happened there. Oh, there we go. All right, so we also have some information here on this screen related to your network adapter. Since the release of our C1M1, which is our dual path communicator, there are some differences on here from previous versions of the ElkRP software to allow you to select which one you have. So if you have an M1XCP, you're going to have this information, the M1XCP setup, which has always been the same kind of stuff on that screen. We'll pop into that for just a second. You can see here's where you can make IP settings. If you wanted to set up email or central station, this is where you're going to find that information. And if you are interested in diving into that topic deeper, we do have some videos on our YouTube channel to show you all that you would need to know about setting up the M1XCP. If you have C1M1, you would make that selection, and you see that there are some changes on the screen related to the C1M1 settings. And the C1M1 doesn't really get configured through the ElkRP software. That's actually done through the ElkLink portal. And again, if you want to dive more into the C1M1 topic about how that works, we have videos where we've done webinars on that on our YouTube channel as well. So we'll be sure to share a link to our YouTube channel when we do the follow-up email so that you can see other videos that dive into specific topics like these. You can check those out. So the next section here, and you've got on your left side a folder items list, and this is how you navigate through the ElkRP software. So you can see we have our different categories here. I'm going to go ahead and go into users, and when I click on that, I'm going to get an overview on the right side of the screen of the users that are in the system, and you can see in this default account I only have one user. You can also click the plus button, and it'll give you a list of the users that you have so that you can go through those. So this is just some basic navigation in the software, and you'll find that this works in all of the categories the same way. So let's say, for instance, we want to add more users. We can right click on the word users, and we'll be given the option for new users. When we click on that, we're given another dialog here to ask us how many users we want to create and where we want to start. So let's just say we want to create 5 more users, and we're going to start at user 2 since we already have a user 1 in the system. Click OK on that, and you get another question. Do you want to copy from an existing user so that it has all the same authorizations as the existing user, or do you want the users to have custom values? In this case, I want some different things to happen for my user, so I'm going to choose custom values. Click OK on that. And now you'll see I have 6 users over here where I had 1 before, and again, if I go to that overview, I'm seeing all of the users that are available. So let's just go into user 2, and we'll go over some of the options that are available for each user. You have a place where you can put in the username, and maybe this is Brad's user code that we're going to be adding in here, so we can give that a name there to identify who's going to be associated with that user. And you can enter your user code. Now these user codes would be associated with ELK keypads. So this is your codes for your data bus keypads to arm, disarm, or it can even be access codes. So Brad may tell us, I want my code to be 1234, or Brad may just say, give me a code and generate one for me on your own. So instead of you having to try to come up with a code, we have a generate button here that allows you to generate a code at random. And say maybe we don't like that one, you can continue to click that button until you get something that you feel like is going to be acceptable. You can also again just enter whatever code the customer tells you that they want. The M1 system can be partitioned into up to 8 areas, and a user can be assigned to multiple areas. So by default, the user is going to be assigned to Area 1, but maybe we want to give Brad access to Area 2 as well. So he can be in Area 1 and Area 2, or we could select all of the areas if we wanted to, any combination of them. You do need to have at least one area selected for the user to work. The other things that we have here on this screen are your user authorizations. So you've got ARM, disarm, bypass. I think those are fairly self-explanatory. Access is for access control. So that is if you want to unlock doors with the code. And if you want to do that sort of thing with the system, then you're going to have this access option selected. You're also going to have some rules associated with that. Now you can have a code that would be able to unlock a door and disarm the system. It's okay to have both of those authorizations selected. I do want to point out, however, that if you're not doing access control, if you're not unlocking doors, you do not need that access credential checked. And we do find in tech support that a good amount of time when you're having problems with one of our third-party software interfaces, like say Crestron or Control4 or that sort of thing, not working correctly, or even with some of our apps like the eKeypad or the M1 Touch Pro, if those aren't able to arm the system correctly, it's most of the time because this access credential has been selected on the user when it was not needed, so just be aware of that. Temporary code is for a user that is only going to be using the code at certain times and when they're going to be using it. So the temporary code cannot disarm the system unless a temporary code was used to arm it. So if you know that the cleaning person is coming on Wednesday, you use a temporary code to arm the system that day, then they'll be able to disarm it. Otherwise, when you've used your normal code to arm, they would not be able to. Master allows you to access menus 6, 7, and 8 from the keypad. Those are user-level menus for doing things like changing user codes, for going into system settings and doing diagnostics and tests and that sort of thing in system settings, changing custom settings on the system, which Brad will explain what custom settings are in a little bit. But if you want to give a user access to those menus, they do need to be a master user. By default, menus 1 through 5 of the keypad do not require a user code. You can make that change where they are required to have a user code in globals, and if you have that option selected in globals, then we have an option here to allow you to specify which users would be allowed in those menus. The duress user code authorization is for that, being forced to disarm the system, that type of situation. And so you don't want to have that selected on the normal everyday user. That's going to be on a special user, and you also have a reporting code that you'll need to enable to make that work. But that's what's going on with that. Now I want to set up one other user here, and let's just say this is a proximity user. If you're going to use proximity cards and fobs, then you do need to enter the information in the ElkRP software a little bit differently. And so there's a checkbox option here, user has access credential instead of code. And when I click that, you'll notice the user code field gets much bigger. Also, the facility code and the card/pin fields become active. And so this allows you to enter information off of the proximity card or fob, or if you're using access keypads connected to, say, one of our M1 KAM modules, then the facility code would be either something that was fixed or programmable in that keypad, and then the pin number would be what the customer's entering on that access keypad. So let's just say, for instance, I have a facility code of 49. And this is, again, information coming off of like one of the Elk Prox cards, and we'll just say that the number coming off of it is 55692 there, and you'll see when I entered that information it automatically populated this user code field. And so this is going to be a user where I only want them to be able to unlock the doors in area 2, for example. You can see how you can, just checking boxes there, make those selections. I'm going to go ahead and move on to areas. As I said earlier, you can have 8 areas on the system, and if you want to add new areas, again, you right click on areas and go to new area, and you can choose how many areas you want to create and where to start. So I'm going to make 2 new areas. I'm going to start adding at area 2, and again I'm going to use custom values. I could copy from area 1 if I wanted to have all of the same entry exit times and that sort of thing, but I'm just going to use custom values here. So you have again a place to name the area, and maybe this is the workshop, whereas area 1 was the main area. You've got your times here for your entry and exit 1 and entry and exit 2. So those are associated with zone definitions. You can have an entry exit 1 zone, entry exit 2 zone, and they could follow different times. So maybe I want to set this exit timer to longer, the entry timer to a little bit longer on entry exit 2 for maybe a garage door or a door that's just farther away from a keypad. In the arming options section, auto stay mode after exit time of no violation, what that does is it monitors whether or not an entry exit door is opened during the exit delay time, and if it's not, then it assumes no one left and it changes to stay mode, and that's to help with false alarm prevention. So if you want that feature turned on, you can check that box. If that's something that you don't want, you would just leave that unchecked. Restart exit timers allows you to, during the exit time, say you forgot your umbrella or something like that, you could go back in and you could press the exit key again and it would restart the exit timer once. It's only going to work once. Another way that you might use that is if you were in the home and you or business, or in this example a home, maybe you're letting the pet out to use the bathroom or whatever, you can press the exit key. That would allow you to open the entry exit door, close it, and then you could let them back in later so that you don't have to disarm the system. Closing ring back is if you want to have a tone acknowledgement at the keypad when the closing report is sent. If you're sending open closing reports, that may be more of a commercial application, probably not going to use that very much residentially. The single and double key press quick arm. That relates to the exit and stay keys on the M1. And if you want to have it where you can just press the exit key and arm the system, or press the stay key and arm the system, you can enable that, and it's single press is enabled by default. And if you wanted to make that where you actually had to press it twice, you could do double press. Now you could also just have neither of those selected, and in that scenario the user would have to enter their user code in order to arm the system. So the difference there being how it's logged. If you want to have a log of who is arming the system, then you're going to want to turn this off so that they can't use that exit key. When the exit key is used, it logs user 203, which it calls no code. So if you do have that enabled, that's what you'll see in the log for who armed the system. But again, if you want to have that record keeping of who's actually arming, you want to turn that off so that they're using their user code, and then it's going to log that as the user. The stay key has some scrolling options to go to 4 different ARM modes, and your customer may not want to use all those ARM modes, so that you can take some of those out to make things less confusing for them if they're not going to be using all of the ARM modes. Stay and stay instant are ARM modes that will have only the perimeter, your entry, exit, and your perimeter type zones armed. None of the interior zones would be armed. And the difference between stay and stay instant would be the instant eliminates entry delays. It does not eliminate exit delays, only eliminates the entry delays, and that again even applies to zones that are programmed to have a delay, would not have a delay if it's armed in an instant mode. The difference between stay and night is that you can have some zones defined as interior night zones, and when you arm in night mode, those interior zones actually become active, so that you can have an extra level of security at night. So maybe that's motion detectors and that sort of thing in an area where you're not going to be moving around at night when you're sleeping, that sort of thing. You can go ahead and have those be armed for extra security. And again, the night instant just eliminates the entry delays on those zones that would be otherwise programmed to have them. If you want to allow the stay key to be able to, easily switch between, say, stay and night, you want to have the allow stay key to change if armed. If this is not checked, you would have to disarm to change between, say, stay and night mode. Now we're looking at keypads. The system can support up to 16 keypads. Again, right-clicking in New gives us new keypads. So all of that pretty much is the same for things that you're going to be adding to the system. Maybe our keypad 2 is in the master bedroom, and we can assign which area the keypad is going to operate in. You can make that selection here. Also note that, we'll see this is keypad 2, and it's saying here that keypad 2's zone is 194. Each of our keypad options, with the exception of our arming station, does have the keypad zone option, and that can be very convenient for covering a door or something like that that maybe you didn't otherwise have wire pulled to. But the zone number of that zone actually gets assigned based on the keypad's address. And this does correlate with an address that you have to set on the keypad itself. And on the keypad, to set the address, you're either going to press and hold the star or the clear button for approximately 15 seconds to get into the addressing menu. We have some options here that you can set for each keypad. Of course, the information that you want to show on that keypad. And the show temperature option that you see there only applies to the M1KP and the M1KPB, as those are the only two keypads that actually have an internal temperature sensor. You would see that that option was grayed out for other keypad models. You've got silent during entry and exit delay options here, and again, that may be a good option for a keypad that's going to be in a sleeping area so that you're not getting those beeps during the entry and exit delay. You can also set the keypad to not chime and that would apply to the sounds that actually come from the keypad if it's in tone mode for chime. LEDs off 60 seconds after no activity will allow the entire keypad to go dark after 60 seconds. So that's going to apply to all of the key backlights, the ready and armed backlights, and the LCD display on the keypad. If you want to require a user code to be entered for the bypass key, you would make that selection here, and then that user would have to have the bypass user authorization that we saw earlier. You've got some settings here related to the sounds from the keypad, the volume and the tone, and also the intensity of the backlight. And then here we have our F key section. This is where you would set up like your panics, like your fire, police, and medical. Those are on this keypad set up by default. You may also want to assign an automation task to a key, and that would tie into a rule that you had defining that task. You can also leave this disabled and write rules to say, whenever this F key is pressed, then do something. You've also got a list of options in your illumination event, and this is what makes the key light up. So maybe you want that to follow the state of a zone, for example. Let's just say we want that to follow the state of zone 1 so that we have that key light up or possibly even blink when that zone is not secure. Maybe you want it to light up or blink when the zone is secure. In this case, you could invert the light. So you've got some options here via these checkboxes to determine how that light will respond. You can have the key require a valid code entry before it will perform its activates event option. You can also set a key to be single press. Now, for your panics like your fire, police, and medical, you likely would not want to do that, but say for this automation task, it's something I want to have easy access to. Maybe this is going to close the garage door, for example. We can name that here, but we can also choose that as a single press so that one press of that button will perform the task. The next item in our list is our zones, and you'll automatically have the hardwired main board. And on the M1 Gold, that's the 16 zones set on the main board, and there are default programming options set for those zones. So we're going to take a look at those, and I mentioned that because say if you have an example that maybe you have a mostly wireless system, you only got a couple hardwired zones, you are going to need to go in and set the zones that are not used to the definition of 00 disabled so that the system doesn't look for that zone to be doing anything. You can see here some of the other options that we have. As I mentioned before, your different exit times are going to be associated with your entry exit 1 and 2. You've got your different interior options, interior and interior follower, interior night and interior night delay. And again, these night specified interior zones would only be active in away and night mode. The interior zones are only going to be active in away mode. You've also got some other zone definitions related to things not burglar alarm related, like your fire alarm. You've also got, if you're going to have a key fob, that would be for a wireless zone, carbon monoxide. There's 30 different definitions here that you can specify for a zone so that you can really drill down into what that's going to be doing. We even support key switch zones, power supervisory zones. The temperature option, now that would only be a valid option if you were going to be working with a zone temperature sensor from ELK. That would be the M1 ZTS or M1 ZTSR, and those are only allowed to be on the main board. So let's just say, for example, I did have one of those on zone 1. Maybe it's monitoring a freezer. And when you have that temperature selected, you do need to choose fast loop response. You wouldn't want chime or bypass on that, but you can see here we have some attributes that would apply to any zone. Let's just hop over to zone 2 and let's just say that's our garage door. We want that to be an entry exit 2 zone. On normal Berg zones, you're going to have some different options for how they're wired. EOL hardwire, that's going to be for hardwired zones that have an end-of-line resistor installed. The M1 uses a 2.2K end-of-line resistor. You can also have zones specified as normally open or normally closed. That would be zones that do not have a resistor installed, and you would specify, the type of sensor circuit that's connected to the zone. You've also got your EOL supervised on short and open, and the difference between that 3 and 4 and 0 here are going to be what we refer to as a security or a day alert. So if you have it EOL supervised on short or EOL supervised on open, you will get a security alert when the system is disarmed and that zone is violated. So maybe you want to have, just even that little extra level of security on, a gun safe or a jewelry armoire, a particular equipment closet or something like that. And even when the system is not armed, you want to know if something's going on with that zone. The attributes here, quite a bit of this is self-explanatory. If you don't want any type of, sounder activation, you can choose silent alarm. If you want it to use dialer delay, listen-in relates to two-way listen-in for alarm verification, and you do have to have the two-way listen-in equipment installed for that to work. That's an add-on. Whether or not the zone can be bypassed. Force armable. Now, bypassing the zone tells the system to ignore the zone completely, and it will be ignored until it is either unbypassed or the system is disarmed. Force arming is a little bit different. That allows the system to ignore that zone while it is violated. You would be able to go arm the system, but as soon as that zone came back to a normal state, it's going to be back in the alarm loop. And then if it were tripped again after that, it would create an alarm. So that might be a good choice for something like a garage door, where maybe you're going to have that zone open, you go arm the system, you back your car out, and then you close the door with your controller in your car, and as soon as the door closes, it's actually part of the alarm system again. Whereas if you had bypassed it, it wouldn't be. Swinger shutdown allows the system to prevent runaway on a zone. It's only going to be able to send in 2 alarms, and then if it continues to trip after that, it's not going to transmit that alarm condition any further. So if you have a zone that maybe is prone to a runaway situation, a motion detector that maybe has something in its sights, or the type of door that's likely to swing open and closed in the wind, that kind of thing, you may want to have that on swinger shutdown. Periodic trip, that means that that zone actually has to be violated at least once during the disarm cycle before the system would be allowed to arm. An example when you might want to use that, say you have a motion detector in a warehouse, and it's likely that things might get stacked in front of it where it's no longer actually seeing motion. You can have it set for periodic trip so that you can see that, hey, that motion detector's not really working. It hasn't tripped all day. There's something blocking its view, and you can go address that situation. It would not allow the system to be armed until it actually tripped once during the disarm cycle. Fast loop response, that relates to how quickly the system responds, and when I say how quickly, I mean we're talking about milliseconds here, and I'll show you those settings here in a minute. So in most cases you're not going to have that selected. One clear distinction, and I mentioned it before, is if you're working with our zone temperature sensors, you do need to have that fast loop response option selected. Enable chime would relate to the tones that you get when the system is in chime tone mode. It also relates to the voice description that you get if you have it in one of the voice modes. So if you don't have this selected, you won't hear anything for that zone. If you do, then and you have the chime turned on at the keypad, then you will. You can put zones in a cross zone pool. That's going to allow you to cross 2 zones and say, okay, within X amount of time, both of these zones would have to be tripped before an alarm response would occur. You have a place here for your voice description, and this is from our preset vocabulary, and you can see there's quite a few words and phrases here, somewhere in the neighborhood of 500. You can drop that down and make selections there, but what is easier is if you just start typing in the field, you can then see words that match what you've typed in so far, and that gets you really quickly to the stuff that you're looking for. So you can see how quickly I'm able to assign the voice description of garage door to this zone. I see a question come in here related to fire zones, so I'm just going to set this to fire alarm, and you'll see that in your top drop down box you are much more limited in your options here. On every zone except for zone 16, you're only going to have this option 5, and fire alarm zones require an end-of-line resistor, and for 4-wire smoke detectors, that's going to be a 2.2K. If you did have that on zone 16 and say that was a fire zone, you'll see here you could either have that be 4-wire or 2-wire. If you do have the 2-wire option selected, then you need an 820 ohm resistor. If you have a expander for hardwired zones, or you have a wireless receiver or transceiver, you will need to right click on zones here to add those zones, and you can see you have an option for hardwired or for wireless. So I'm going to go ahead and select the wireless option here. Click OK on that, and now you see I have a wireless group too. So this is how you would program your wireless zones, and everything that you see on this part of the screen is going to be the same. So this could be a door sensor. We want to set that to have an entry exit. You can set all these same kind of options for that zone, even voice description. The main difference with your wireless group is you've got this wireless setup button here, and that allows you to enter the information related to that wireless zone. You can set the supervision. If it's a door, then you want it normally supervised. If it's a smoke detector, then you can choose the fire supervision. Say it's a key fob or a panic button, then you would want it not supervised. If it is a key fob or a panic button, you can assign a user ID to it for logging purposes. And then below that here we have our options to enter the ID number. If it is an ELK device, an ELK two-way wireless device, then you're going to enter a TX ID number here. If it is a Honeywell wireless device, you're going to enter their ID number in this HID field. Then the ITI-GE format, you'll either have a TXID or a DL, and it will be labeled as such, and you need to put it in the appropriate field. But it's very important that you enter the ID number in the correct field, as they are going to basically, when you enter, say, one from the ELK sensor, I'm just going to enter one here so that you can see what happens. It does come up with information in another field as well. So you definitely got to be sure to put it in the right field. So with the Honeywell and with the ELK sensors, we use loop numbers to determine how the sensor is going to work, and more specifically with, say, like our universal sensor, which part of the sensor is associated with the zone. So you do need to set the loop number if you're working with ELK two-way wireless or with Honeywell. With the GE or the ITI format wireless, if you do happen to have a sensor that has the option for an external contact, that's what option 1 and option 2 are about. Option 1 tells the system, hey, there's an external contact connected to this GE sensor. Option 2 tells the system that that external contact is normally closed. So if it happens to be a normally open external contact, you'll only have option 1. If it's a normally closed external contact, you'll have option 1 and option 2. But again, those only apply to the ITI-GE settings, not to the ELK wireless or the Honeywell. The option here for the PIR also only applies to GE motion detectors. All right, so let's just very quickly go through the setup for a key fob. If you have a wireless key fob, you're going to set the definition to 15 for key fob. And again, going to the wireless setup here, you would want to set this to not supervised. You would want to put in your ID number, and that's going to tell the system that, hey, this is a key fob device. So I'm not sure why that keeps happening. Sorry about that. That's how you set up the zone. The next thing for wireless is this wireless setup option here, and that does differ from the wireless setup button that's on the main screen. So you can see here it's coming up directly to the key fob events tab, and that's what I wanted to show you here. This is where you set what your buttons on your key fob do. So if you have one of the ELK key fobs or one of the other manufacturer's key fobs, it's got 4 buttons on it. Your button 1 and button 2 are going to automatically be defaulted to arm away and disarm. But let's say you want button 4 to be a panic of some kind. You want that to trigger a police alarm. Then you can select that here, or maybe you wanted it to trigger a medical alarm. You can make those selections here. You can also write rules to tell the system what to do with those buttons, and Brad will show you that here in just a bit. Cutoff timers, which is just below your wireless setup, is related to your output 1 and output 2 alarm sounder activation and how long that's going to go off for a particular alarm. You can see the default values here. Let's say for a medical alarm you don't want the siren to go off at all, then you can set that to 1, and by having that set to 1, the siren will not sound. You're still going to get beeps at the keypad, you're still going to get the display at the keypad, it's still going to report, but it just won't sound the sirens on output 1 and output 2. In globals, there's a lot in globals, and some of it's very specific to different applications, so I just want to hit a few high points here. The M1 Gold does have a telephone remote control where you can use DTMF tones to interface with the system as if it were a keypad in ways. So if you wanted to have that enabled, you could set that here. That works with a phone line going into the panel, so you would have to have a phone line going in to be able to use that feature. You've got some options here related to how the system displays date and time, and that's, if different areas may use a different format for your date and time, or maybe you need your temperature displayed in Celsius instead of Fahrenheit. If you want to observe daylight savings time, I know there are some areas of the country that do not observe daylight savings time, so say maybe you want to turn that off, you could do that here in globals. On the zones tab, we have those settings, and again, they are in milliseconds for your loop response time. You've also got some options here related to that cross zoning that we talked about. But the main thing I wanted to point out here is this audible system troubles. This relates to beeps on the keypad for things like AC failure, low battery, phone fault, that sort of thing. If you don't want the keypad to beep in those conditions, you can uncheck this box. Again, those things would still be displayed on the keypad. They would still report if they're set up to do so. It just wouldn't cause the keypad to beep. So that may be something that your customer desires, so they don't hear beeps in the middle of the night for those kind of troubles if they were to occur. I'm going to hop over here to the G29 through G42 Special tab. Here we have some options related to, how the system's going to deal with a telephone. You've also got some options for your two-way listen-in. If you want to change the baud rate of serial port 0 for whatever reason, maybe you're interfacing with something that requires that to be at a different speed, you can make that change here. Typically that's going to be able to stay the same. But one of the things that you might find yourself coming to this screen for are these options here in the serial port 0 transmit options. This relates to what comes out of the M1 serial port when events occur, and that would affect your apps like eKeypad, M1 Touch Pro, the M1 To Go software, and also the integration with some of the software user interface partners, your Elan, your Control4, your Savant, that sort of thing. You want to have all of these checked in those cases so that they're getting everything. Now we'll get into telephones. This is how you would set up reporting, and this is how you set up reporting regardless of whether or not you're using a telephone line itself. Maybe you have the M1XEP and you're using that for IP, or maybe you have the new C1M1 from Elk that does IP and cellular. In either case, you're going to need to set up a telephone entry. So again, right click and go to New Telephone, and then you can set up your telephones here. I'm going to go ahead and create two right quick. And so this is going to be where you set up information for the reporting. Now if you're using a phone line, you've got a place here to actually put in a telephone number. If you're using a phone line, then you're going to have like contact ID or SIA most likely as one of your reporting formats, although we do support the Pulse 4+2 and even the pager formats. If you're wanting to set up, say, someone's telephone, like a cell phone for instance, to receive a call and get a voice message, then you would choose voice message here. IP would be the correct selection for the M1XEP or the C1M1, and then the other option here is serial expander, and that is what's used to interface with some third-party cellular units like Uplink, for example, through our M1XSP serial interface. We're going to show an IP example here. You would choose what things that you actually want to report using that method. If you want alarms and that sort of thing, of course, you have that selected. Global system events is like your low battery AC failure. If you want user opening and closing, zone troubles, or bypasses, and you want to make those selections. You also need to choose the area or areas that will be used here. So I'm going to select all three areas that I created here so that I can report everything for all of the areas. And once you've made that selection, then you would be able to either with the M1XEP go into the M1XEP setup and put in the settings there, or if you're using C1M1, then that's really all you have to do in ElkRP for C1M1 is what I've shown you here. Everything else is done for the setup is done in the ElkLink portal, and again, there's webinar videos online if you want to know more about that. In either case, whether you're reporting IP, cellular, telephone, whatever the case may be, you must go into the communicator section and set your reporting codes. There are 5 different categories here. I'm just going to drop into the zone RCs page, and you'll see for each zone there is an alarm, restoral, bypass, and trouble reporting code. A reporting code that has a 01 in the pulse column is turned on. A reporting code that has 00 in the pulse column is turned off. So if you want to turn on a reporting code, you need to enter 00. Say I want to get bypasses on all of my zones and I don't want to have to go down through here and enter 01 on all of these. I can right click on the word pulse and set the entire column, and you'll see that it's doing that for me, and you'll also notice that it's automatically populating the contact ID and SIA codes for those events. System RCs is where you're going to set up like your daily timer test. It's also where you find some of the troubles that I was referring to, output 2 trouble, low battery trouble, AC failure, that sort of thing, phone fault. If you want to set up AC fail report, you can set the minutes that the AC has to be out here before it actually triggers that report. You're also setting how frequently. If you want to have an automatic test, you need to enable that reporting code with 01, and you'll see that that automatically filled in those codes. But I also have to tell it, okay, I want that to happen, how frequently. Let's say I want to do it once a week. I'm going to do it every 7 days. And then what time of day do I want that to happen? Let's say I want that to happen at 2:15 a.m. That I'm going to have it send that once a week, 2:15 a.m. So those are the 3 things that you must set for automatic tests. Under the area RCs, you've got your dialer delay, cancel window, and you'll see there's a tab here for each area. And the main thing I came to this screen to show you was if you do have that duress reporting code, or a duress user code set up, you must enable this duress reporting code in order for that to send a report. So I know that was a lot of information to go through. I think I've got one other question here that I can answer, but then I want to turn it over to Brad so that he can spend the remainder of the time on automation. The voice descriptions from the system only come from speakers connected to output 1 on the M1 system. None of the keypad models that we offer actually output any of the voice. That's only from output 1 on the main system. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Brad so that he can go over the automation section with you.
All right, thank you, Amy. That was very good information, and I hope everyone can really see the benefit of the RP software. It's really simple, super intuitive, makes programming so much easier. But for the most part, everything that Amy has gone over so far through RP could have been done through keypad programming, with the exception of setting up the voice commands, setting those voice descriptors for each zone. That can only be done through RP. But everything else, entering your users and your areas and your zones, could have been done through keypad programming. But with the RP software, really simple, and we offer several different ways to connect to the M1 system, either direct connect, through the XEP, through C1M1, even through a modem connection. So many different ways to connect your PC to the system for programming. What I would like to get into right now is the automation side of the M1 system. So we're going to go down to the bottom. We're going to open up automation, and we're going to see we have several different options here. And what I'd like to say, this is where we really start setting the M1 apart from standard traditional security systems. I mean, the M1's a very good rock-solid security system by itself, but now we're able to cross over, or we call it a cross-platform control, so that you can bridge over into automation. And what are some things that we can do in automation? Well, we can automate lighting, thermostats. We can set up life enhancement type scenarios where we're automatically controlling those lights when certain individuals come in the evening. We're setting back the thermostat when you leave for the day. We're giving you notifications when somebody comes home and disarms the system, maybe little Johnny or little Susie. You get a text message or a phone call that they're home and the system's been disarmed. You can get a notification based upon a non-alarm event. Let's say that freezer alarm that we set up earlier. That doesn't need to go to central station, but you'd like to be notified if the temperature got too warm in the freezer. That too could be done through a phone call or a text message or an email from the M1 system. So let's go under automation real quick, and we're going to look at task. Now our first menu here basically names a task. We have 32 available tasks, and they can be called macros or events. This simply just gives a name to it, and later we'll create a rule that will tell the task what to do. So for task number 1, I may just simply want to call it heat mode. And the show option here allows the name to display on the Elk keypads under a special menu, as well as our third-party apps and M1 to go, so that you can see that name under the task drop-down. The voice description, you can assign a 6-word phrase to the task, so that can be used through the telephone remote control capability. I'm just going to call, I'm going to go ahead and set up task 2 while I'm here. We'll call it, water the lawn. Okay, I'll make sure I'll check mark that. Like I said, this is simply naming the task. Our next item on our list is lighting. And under lighting, the M1, we're very fortunate that we can integrate with a number of different lighting manufacturers and technologies, anywhere from UPB, Insteon, PulseWorks, all the way up to a low voltage system like Centralite and Vantage. We can have up to 256 devices. Out of that 256, for the most part, on average, we will say that the first 192 of them, 193 of them would be individual nodes, and the last 64 scenes or links. That can vary from manufacturer to manufacturer. That's just kind of a rough idea of how many individual devices that could be controlled. Now, what we have here is device number 1. We're going to call it Light 1. Under the format, that's the technology. Now, right now, the standard would be for the X10. We also have our serial port expander, and that's for the majority of our lighting technologies will be controlled through our serial port expanders, and we offer several different models depending on the technology you're going to interface with. So I'll say serial port expander. The type would be either an on-off switch or a dimmer or an appliance module or other. This OPT option, unless you're using Insteon lighting, you will never check the OPT. That's for Insteon only. Once again, our show box allows the name, whatever I call this light, to show up on the keypad or in the third-party apps. And then we have a voice description. We can assign a 6-word phrase to our lights, and that can be used in the telephone remote control capabilities, that you can assign a voice description and then you can turn that light on using telephone remote control. An option under lighting is if you right-click on lighting, you can go to import lighting data, and this shows you the different formats that allows you to take their file and import it directly into the RP software, so you're not having to duplicate what you've already done. Say if you're using universal devices and ISY, with the Insteon network, you can import their information as well as UPB Upstart, CBus, and the Lutron Radio RAW2 XML database. You can import that directly into RP, and that'll populate the names and the format and so forth. So it's a real convenient way to get that information from their software or setup into the ElkRP. Let's look at outputs. The M1 itself has the capability of having 205 outputs. Now, this screen here allows you to name the first 64. After that, it's simply output 65 through output 208. But here we can assign different names. For instance, like I may want to call output 3, the sprinklers. Whoops. Okay, and we'll click show. Once again, that allows that name to show up, and then we can obviously give it a voice description. And we can do that for the first 64 outputs. Now, output 1 and 2, those are, for the most part, those are hard-coded. You would never want to control output 1 and 2 through rules, with the exception that you could chirp output 2 X number of times, let's say as an audible notification when arming and disarming. But output 1 and output 2, for the most part, not controllable through rules. Those are hard-coded. Sunrise, sunset. The M1 has a built-in astronomical clock, and it will know when it's daylight and when it's dark outside based upon your latitude and longitude. We have a convenient select a city near you where we can select, well, we'll do Wilmington, that's there. So we'll go ahead and select Wilmington. We'll use these settings. Oops. Apologize for that. A little technical difficulty. There we go. All right, and then of course our time zone for Wilmington would be -5 at North America Eastern. I'd calculate these settings, and now RP and the M1, once I send this information down, will know the sunrise and sunset settings, even based upon the daylight savings time. So we have that information already programmed in. We have voice description. And under voice description, you have several different menus, and we won't go through all of them, but you can actually come in and reconfigure some of the voice descriptions that the M1 already has. One of the ones which I would probably discourage from ever modifying would be the telephone remote control, because those activate predefined events, and if you change an event to another name, may not work quite the way you think it should. So I would not modify telephone control. But under System Miscellaneous, you actually have 10 locations that you can customize your on voice description using the vocabulary, or through the M1 system, you can custom record 10 6-second locations directly into the board. So if there's a word or a phrase that we don't currently support for you, you can use a house telephone as a microphone. You can make a custom recording which is stored in the M1 board, and then come into this menu and say, okay, I'd like to use custom number 1, for instance, and that would be the custom recording that I created. So we give you 10 6-second locations where you can custom record your own voice. Would like to talk about custom settings. And a custom setting, we have 20 of those. Custom setting is a value that is set up in a rule. It could be a time of day. Let me just pull down the menu. Okay, it can be a number. It can be a timer value. It can be a time of day. Now, why would we want to associate a custom setting here? Well, let's say, for instance, we create a rule. We're going to do a rule where we actually water the lawn. And I'm going to make that a timer, a time of day. And for that timer, I'm going to probably set that for 5 a.m. Now, in my rule, which we'll go over in a few minutes, I'm going to tell the system at 5 a.m. I want to turn the sprinkler on. Now earlier I set output 3 as the relay to control the sprinkler. So let me go ahead and this I'm going to set to a timer value. And we'll say 10 minutes. Because these are custom settings, once my rule is sent, I can actually go back in through keypad programming and adjust these settings if it's a custom setting. This is the only parameter of a rule that can be customized or adjusted or changed if it's a custom setting. This can be done through the keypad programming. So if you set up the system, send your rules, everything's working perfectly, but later on the homeowner may decide, 5 a.m. it's too late. I need it to be earlier than that. Well, they can adjust that custom setting through the keypad. They could set it to 4 a.m. Or if they say, okay, well, the sprinklers are running way too long, the flower bed's getting flooded, you can adjust it from 10 minutes down to 5 minutes. So that's the purpose of a custom setting, and like I said, you can have 20 of those. Moving down the list, we have counters. And a counter is just that. We have, I think it's 32 counters, 64 counters. We have 64 counters. They can count from 0 up to 65,535, or it can be set to a specific value and checked within rules. A number of times we'll use counters as flags, and we have an option where we can toggle a counter between 0 and 1, and that way we could set up an on-off type switch, which is a good scenario. So I'm going to do the front light, and that's going to assign that to counter 1. And I'll create a quick rule shortly, and we'll show you how to actually use that feature. Under thermostats, very simply, we're just assigning a name to the thermostat, and that's how the thermostat will show up under third-party apps or M1 to go, as well as the ELK keypad. The M1 does support up to 16 thermostats. Under text strings here, we can click New, and basically you can create custom text strings. And this may be a custom message that you want sent across the keypad, or it could be a custom ASCII string. If there's a piece of equipment that we currently don't directly integrate with, but you know what their RS-232 protocol is, you can recreate those RS-232 strings here in the M1 system and then use our M1XSP, our serial port expander, connected to their RS-232 input and send and receive those strings back and forth. So even though it's something that we don't already integrate with, as long as we have some ASCII string, RS-232 ASCII strings, maybe something like a pool pump or a pool automation control, a Jandy system or something. I think they published the RS-232 protocol, so you could create those custom strings to turn on and off the pump or the filter or the lights and so forth. Wouldn't be able to get temperature readings because that would probably take way too many strings, but for some general purpose automation, certainly doable using this feature. You could create a custom string like happy birthday, and at a specific time of day of the year, you could have this special message go across the screen. Take out the trash, or it's the 30th, pay your bill, things like that. It's customizable. All right, last item, and it's the one that I really wanted to get to, excuse me, is rules. And rules, excuse me there. Rules is really a very, very powerful thing within the M1 system. So you can have, let's just get started here with a new rule. And what our rules are based on, we call them whenever and then rule engine. So a whenever statement can be anything within this list here. It can be a time occurrence. It could be related to a specific time of day, at sunrise, plus or minus certain time parameters, 15, 20 minutes, whatever, at sunset, whenever an hour equals. You could have something happen every second if you wanted to. You can have a whenever statement based upon a zone changing state, whether it goes open or closed or bypassed. When an output changes state, so if we have another rule that says whenever output 3 turns off, then do something different. The keypad function keys. Now earlier Amy set up, or we talked about how typically we would have F1 through 3 being set up for police, fire, medical. That's fine. You also, depending on the keypad, either have anywhere from 1 to 3 additional function keys, and we can set those up to do automation tasks, control relays, access control. It's totally up to you. Your imagination is really your limitation as far as our rule engine here, because we have so many different options available for the whenever. Those wireless key fobs, sure, you've got button 1 and 2 for your arming and disarming, but perhaps maybe we want to set button 3 up to control the garage door. We can certainly do that through the rules. I apologize for this. We're having a little technical difficulty. All right. All right, lighting change. Those automation tasks. Let me jump in here real quick because we've set up our automation task. We called it heat mode. And so, for instance, whenever heat mode task 1 is activated, Amy, maybe if we close the PowerPoint, don't know if that'll help. All right, hopefully everyone is still seeing the RP screen here. So whenever heat mode is called for, and that could be task 1, like I said, that's from the ELK keypad or a third-party app. What would you like to happen? Well, that's a then statement. So then I would go under thermostats, And I could set thermostat 1, which I neglected to name earlier, but I want to set it to heat. And then I'm going to set a desired heat 70 degrees. So every time that task is called, it would, well, there we go, heat. Oh, okay. I'm going to set it to heat.
I think it has to be named or it won't keep it.
I think you're right. I believe you are correct. So back under thermostats, we'll call this not heal. Oh wait. All right. Go back to my rules now. Find new, whenever, and automation task. Then thermostat. Yep. Heat. And we'll set it to heat and desired temperature to 70 degrees. So there we've created a task, real simple. Okay, and once we're done, we're done. We click done, and now that rule is ready to be sent to the control. But some other whenevers, the security system. Whenever the system is armed, when it's disarmed, based upon the burglary status, whether it's ready to arm or not ready to arm, day alerts, entry, exit delays are running. You can see a number whenever the alarms turn on or cut off. So you can base an event based upon a specific alarm. Our access feature, the chime, as well as zone status, bypass status, miscellaneous trouble events, receiving and sending those custom ASCII strings, whenever a counter changes, whenever the thermostat changes. So if the thermostat is capable of broadcasting when it changes, then that could be a rule engine event for the M1 system. So you can see with the whenever statements, you have approximately 110 different whenevers. So that's a trigger, that's an input. So what happens after that? Well, typically that would be the then statement, but you also have an and. Ands are conditional, and an and statement would have to be true before the then statement would fire. So a rule is a single whenever, but you can have multiple ands. They all must be true before it would actually do the then statement. So what are and statements? Well, they're time of day, specific days of the week, month, or even year. Is it light or dark outside based upon the latitude and longitude? Is a specific zone secure, not secure, or bypassed? Is an output already in an on state? Who was the last person that disarmed the system? Is a light on or off? Is the system armed or disarmed or in alarm? Do we have any specific trouble conditions, an AC fail, a phone fault? Is that counter set to 0? The temperature and the settings of a thermostat, all those can be and statements. You have about 96 different and statements available. Now the then, that's what happens. That's when all the parameters are met. We have our whenever, we have our trigger. We've met all the ands, which are optional. You don't have to have them. Then what do you want to happen? Well, automation tasks, for instance. Security. We can arm and disarm the system. We can turn on or off outputs. Certainly control lighting. You can have the M1 speak specific messages. Send that custom text message out serial port for the M1 XSP. Send text to keypad, so you have that happy birthday message. We can enable and disable the chime without even having to touch the keypad. You can beep the keypads if you would like to. There's where we can chirp the outside siren. That's the only rule that really controls output 2, is being able to chirp the outside siren. You can set those counters. You can dial that telephone number that's set up for 5, voice dial, and deliver a predefined voice message from the drop-downs. certainly send email messages through the M1 XSP, certainly control the parameters of the thermostat, enable or disable users, enable or disable the voice, that's output 1, bypass, unbypass zones, you can even perform the smoke power reset, as well as control the send custom signals to our supported whole house audio system that Russ Sound, Proficient, and Nuvo. So these are the then statements, and within this list there's well over 28 then statements available, 28 events that we could control and so forth. So let's take a look while we have a couple minutes left. Let's set up what was one? Oh, the function key. Okay, based upon keypad function key, I'm just going to select on any keypad F6, and we didn't define it, but we're going to control the light using this F6 key and a counter. So whenever F6 key is pressed, okay, what would I like to happen? Well, I want to toggle a counter. So I'm going to go down here and select counter. I'm going to select a counter. It was the front light, counter 1. I want to toggle it between, oh, sorry, that should have been, yeah, there it is. Toggle between 0 and 1, okay? Now that rule is done. So basically what this rule here is doing is just simply toggling that counter between 0 and 1. So now, whenever I want to look at the counter change, I'm going to say that whenever front light counter 1 is equal to a fixed value of 0, I want to then turn the light off. So I'm going to go under lighting into visual, and I'm going to say, okay, I want to turn light 1 off. Okay, that rule's done. But the next time that F key is pressed and that counter toggles to 1, I want to turn the light on. So I'm going under lighting, into visual. Now I'm going to turn light 1 on. I could set it to a specific level if I'd like. I'm just going to turn it on full bright. So as you can see, with these 3 rules, I've created an on-off switch using a function key on a keypad to turn on the light. I could just as easily set up different rules to also base it upon the time of day and day of the week and so forth. So as you can see, the rules, whenever, you can one whenever statement per rule. You can have multiple and statements that are optional. You can have multiple then statements. So even though my rules right now only show one then statement, I could have a whole string of then statements within this one rule, and it would just activate one then after another and so forth. So this is the power of the ElkRP rule engine, and like Amy mentioned earlier, on our website we do have some rule examples. We've done a whole webinar on rule writing, so it's a very good resource. There's also an example of some rules that don't work, so that's good to review too, because even though it may look right, it's a possibility that it could have been misconfigured just due to a parameter that wasn't quite right. So a quick overview of the rules in the RP software. Amy, do we have any questions?
We do have a couple of questions that we can get to real quickly. I've run out of time, but we'll go over these questions very quickly. Can you use Nest brand thermostats with the M1?
No, unfortunately not at this time. The M1 doesn't support the Nest protocol.
Okay. And what does the opt button do in regards to Insteon?
Well, that's a good question. I just know that our engineer that designed the XSP to work with the Insteon, I forget what that option does. It just has to be checked for Insteon and unchecked for everyone else. But it might be something we can include in the follow-up.
I think it may have something to do with the fact that the Insteon is going through the universal devices over the network through the M1 XEP instead of an M1 XSP. This still a little fuzzy on it myself, but I think it might have something to do with that. Good
point. Something we'll have to look into. Good question.
Okay, and just going back to the thermostats, if you do want to know which thermostats we do work with, we do have a list of thermostats and all of our other partners on our website. If you go to elkproducts.com, under the About tab, you'll see integration partners, and they are categorized by what that partner does for us. So you can see a list of all our lighting partners, all of our thermostat partners, and there's a lot of information there, beyond just we work with this company. You can drill down into that and see what products that we support with that company, and also any resources that are available, manuals, documentation, videos, that sort of thing. So we do want to thank everyone for spending some time with us today going over the ElkRP software. There's a lot to go over here in such a short amount of time, so we have a webinar that we've done where we kind of go beyond the basic stuff that we went over today. You want to check that out if you're interested in more information. As Brad pointed out, we have a webinar where we talk just about rules and go over numerous examples of rules. So a lot of resources available on that YouTube channel. Be sure to go check that out. Be sure to follow us on social media for updates on what's going on with ELK. You'll get information on new products, information on webinars and trainings and that sort of thing that we're doing, so it's a good way to connect with us. If you do have any questions, feel free to send us an email at training@elkproducts.com. We'll be happy to get those questions answered for you. Otherwise, I'd just like to thank Brad for being here with us today on this webinar and helping go over so much of this ElkRP material, and thank you for joining us. And if you have any questions, again, just let us know. Have a great weekend.